Welcome back, everyone. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our next guest. From his corporate marketing background as a New York City-based TV and digital executive at such companies as Viacom, Disney, Sony Pictures Entertainment, NBC Universal, Madison Square Garden Entertainment, as well as various digital startups, several years ago, he was recruited and relocated to Washington, D.C. to transform, reimagine, and reinvent the business-to-business, events-based Speakers Bureau business. With a focus on the power of storytelling and emotional connections through audience experiences, his fresh, unique, and forward-thinking approach applied a content-driven and media-focused lens to the traditional role of events, conferences, and meetings. Currently, as a principal of his consulting firm, Mitchell Partnership Alliances, he advises organizations from Fortune 500 companies to associations, including PwC, NAB, the USO, and many others on the operational, creative, strategic, and communications alignment across the integrated channels with virtual, hybrid, and physical in-person events at the core of the customer journey, all while building continuous engagement and community. Please welcome my next guest, Bob Mitchell.
Hi, thanks so much, Wendy and Event Titans, and of course, everyone in the audience. By the way, what happened to the hip hop intro music, Wendy?
I don't know. It went away. You're just too fabulous. You didn't even need it.
Oh my God. By the way, it was so great talking to you earlier in the green room. You know, of course, we were sharing, our stories coming from ABC and our TV days. And now we're both, smack in the middle of events, conferences, and meetings. And who's to say that, years ago that it's now much, much closer to virtual and hybrid events with TV, right? Who would have ever thought?
But before we move on, I actually want to shout out that illustrious CV that I just articulated to our audience. You have really, as the Gen Zers say, you have done the damn thing. So big up. I hope that everyone has pen and paper because Bob is about to bring some paradigm shifting information to all of you. So my question to you is, today we're going to be hearing a lot about digital transformation, right? Let's just jump in and talk about how you see it. Take us through the top line thoughts.
Well, before I go into that, and in fact, for me, there's so much obviously that everyone's reading, everyone's hearing, everyone's on this webcast. But yeah, I actually want a wonderful panel, by the way, beforehand. Wonderful panel. Those guys, they killed. But I have to actually beg to differ on a couple of things. So I'm just going to go right in with that because it's like the perfect kind of discussion. Because with my background, as you mentioned, Wendy, I come with a unique vantage point to the events business. I come with a media and content lens, right? And so on the conversation earlier about platforms, it was always interesting to me, again, because of my unique position. I didn't hear the word content, okay? And no matter what platform there is, and there are dozens, it's all about the content that's in the platform. And again, it's really so important, and it's one of the things we're going to talk about. But the other thing I do want to mention, and I know I'm going totally off the approved script, so I'm so sorry. This is approved script, everybody. What is like? Wait a minute.
No, honey, I'm going with you. Keep going. I got you. Keep going.
And by the way, there's a kill switch if I go too way off, right? Is it like in broadcast, right? There's always a kill switch.
There might be a cattle prod. Who knows? I'll have to
go to commercial. Go to commercial. Okay. But, okay. So what is Exhibit A, some of the things that we're going to talk about today is, I just saw yesterday a LinkedIn post, okay, from a well-known global events company, okay? I'm not going to share their name, okay, but I want to read it to the audience, all right? And picture this, the visual is a half-empty hotel ballroom of socially distanced individuals, Okay.
Okay.
So it says across the U.S., large hashtag meetings and hashtag business events are happening now. It's time to replace the internet connection with hashtag face-to-face connections and get back to meeting in person. Well, first of all, replace the internet connection. Look what happened yesterday with the Facebook outage. Yeah. Really? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
Very timely.
So this is like, again, the vantage point of old school, new school. Okay. First of all, why with that particular post, I didn't comment on it because I would love to crowdsource the chat room comments and then I'll comment. Okay. I held off. But why is it an either or proposition? Number one. Okay. All right. And shouldn't this be about connections, no matter where you are and how they're made? Okay. And by the way, I'm just curious. And shouldn't the look and feel, in fact, at the event, be more than just a hand sanitizer station that's added to the experience? And maybe it is. And what have we learned, right, in the 18 months, all right, from when the world closed from the pandemic? I always say reopening is not a strategy. And you see again right now the industry is in that inflection point, right?
Well, to your point, we talked about this before, how entrenched some aspects of the event industry can be, how desperately a lot of event planners cling to the established norms. And so what you're articulating is very, very, like, it really harkens to that point that you spoke about when we were discussing this privately.
Right. Well, I tend sometimes, because coming from media and content, I see the world a little differently than many others in the industry. Although I have, as you said, I have B2B conference experience. But I say, by the way, the world has been introduced with things like metaverse, right, and things like NFTs and Clubhouse, and yet the majority of posts in the industry are putting up cardboard standees and putting up their booth exhibits. All good, but to me the juxtaposition is, wait a minute, we need to be more forward thinking along those lines. And so I wanted to bring this up. And so it really starts with transformation, right? And I always start like, okay, what?
Say it again. See that word, transformation.
Transformation, folks. And I say, okay, before you even talk about transformation, you have to determine, what business are you in? Are you in the physical or virtual real estate business? Or are you in the business of audience experiences? Now, I'm going to go further with that. So many of my friends and colleagues that have come, that have risen up in the event industry, they're so talented and wonderful, but their focus and specialties have always been on operations, logistics, sourcing, and all necessary. But that's focused on the feature, function aspect of the business, and not necessarily on the strategic or the creative. Okay. And I say that in only the best way. And look, and it's not just about, okay, physical versus virtual. Physical, the feature, function, okay, the specs of the hotel room, the seating plan, all those things. Even in virtual, it's a default. It's a default of, okay, what are the specs of the platform? What are the break room functionalities? The panel was wonderful that we just heard, but I use that as an example, with all due respect, that it didn't get to creative storytelling. It didn't get to design. It didn't get to content. And that we cannot, put on the back burner behind the feature, function. It's like putting the cart behind the horse.
Yes. It's interesting because I always, coming from the Broadway and the broadcasting background, we have that in common. I'm always a bit of an outlier in the way that I view what it is that we do and how we do it. Like, even the ask for me as a moderate host MC has changed significantly. I'm no longer just the face front camera person. I'm now the lighting designer, the sound designer, the set designer, all the things. I'm locking my cat in the bedroom so he doesn't come out in the middle of the broadcast. I'm shushing my daughter and telling her to take all of her items off of Wi-Fi so that my signal doesn't crash. I mean, this last 18 months, if we haven't really taken in internally that it is time to make the big leap, I don't know what it was all for.
Well, I do believe that. Well, first of all, it's not going to be a light switch kind of approach. All right, that's for sure. That is for even pandemic or no pandemic. We're seeing those that cling to to legacy. We see it clearly. Hey, blah blah blah. Expo is reopening, and I'm always like the pictures of half empty expo halls, and all good and well intended. But where's the digital part of that? It just, again, the communication even says, okay, that last 18 months of virtual, well, that was more like a stopgap. Stop the patient from bleeding, put the tourniquet on. But going back to the feature, function, legacy of the events business, what it does is that it makes a business into a commodity. All right. Technology is going to show that so well. It's happening with the proliferation of so many different kinds of event platforms and event management systems. Every few weeks, there's a new announcement, all very exciting. But that means if you cling on to that, you're in a commodity-like space. OK, but if you raise the value proposition for your business, for your customers, for the attendees, and focus on audience experiences and storytelling, that's a higher proposition. Wendy, people in the TV business, I'm going to go back, to our TV business. Yes. When do they look? The fact is that TV people talk about the pipes, and how it's delivered or the devices? No, you talk about content.
Yeah, content is king.
Content is king. Content is king. And so one of the things that I always say is that events are content. I want to say it slow. Events are content, just like video, just like a podcast, just like an e-newsletter, just like a blog. And that's a whole new, different kind of mindset, accelerated, mind you, by virtual and hybrid, because now the experiences are so drastically different in everything, obviously from, one screen based, one is, obviously physical in person, the obvious. One is one to many in the hotel ballroom versus one to one, right?
Yes.
One is anytime, anywhere, and one is locked into a time and destination. One is pushed out, like when you're in the hotel ballroom and you're like, you can't leave because you're going to bump somebody's coffee, and or one is pulled in, where it's like people choose to consume your content, right? Mm-hmm. One is more interactive, like, with virtual versus, in person, which is like, if you get 5 minutes of Q&A and some, Twitter scroll on that's interactive. So it's so different, but it all comes down to the strength of, the audience experience and the storytelling.
So how important is who is telling these stories? Because you're talking about the content, but I know that you also have very strong opinions about who the storytellers are. Can you speak to us a bit about that?
Well, the storytellers in this context of B2B, of course, are the various different organizations and brands. Everyone has a story. But what I have found is that in specifically events versus in media is that, as I mentioned, the form and the function is put ahead of things like the narrative, or things like the script, of things like again, themes. And we're like, okay, do we have that hotel ballroom in 3 months? And by the way, we need to do this tech platform deal, and we got to make sure that it's able to fill 500 participants. And the other part, okay, is left very secondary, and there's a number of reasons why. Okay. And I'm going to continue. Okay. And by the way, please, anyone in the chat, I encourage conversation in the chat. I can be a little bit of a contrarian, but because of where I sit, I see things in a very different, unique way. And so it all goes back to, again, in many times in various different organizations, events are siloed. They have been historically siloed, separate from comms, separate from marketing, separate. And so there lies that historically, it has been about executing. It has been about logistics and not so much about the content and the story. It's changing. One of the things I've noticed so much, I think I'd love to hear from the audience as well, is that even the structure of organizations are changing, of where events sit, maybe to get aligned with the CMO, aligned with the chief experience officer, aligned with whomever, because it all needs to be integrated. It all needs to be integrated, and that's a part aligning that content. That so many times events have been a one and done proposition.
Yes, you talked a lot. Yes, channels, please.
Okay, one and done proposition, okay, is that the circus comes to town, you put up the tent for 3 days, the circus is over, the tent comes down, and we'll see you next year. That's a one and done proposition. It is not very sustainable to build community. It's not very sustainable from a revenue standpoint. It's not very sustainable even driving to that particular event, because you need to utilize all the channels along the customer journey, pre-event, event, post-event. So it could be everything channels, okay? Could be everything from your quarterly newsletter, again, podcast series, a YouTube channel, your website, of course. All those are channels that should, again, be mapped out in a very media-like fashion with an editorial calendar to support what all your various different events, whether they're on-demand webinars, or whether there are big live hybrid events. All right, they should be a mix.
So I hope everybody heard that, because Bob is giving y'all the secret sauce right now. I hope everyone had their pen and their paper and was writing all of that down, because that's like gold. Talk to me a bit about relationships and partnerships through the lens of a media approach.
Sure. Well, partnerships are critical, and coming from media, they could come in all different shapes and sizes. And look, I think the events business have existing partners, some amazing existing partners, of course, with venue operators, hospitality, sponsors across the board, right? But if your proposition is a one and done proposition, that means it's only transactional. You're only leveraging for that one time a year, or the 2 times of the year. It's not continuous. It doesn't maximize it. So for partnerships, you want kinds of partners that can drive greater awareness, all right, or expand revenue opportunities, or extend your reach, your audience reach. There's so many really valid strategies for partnerships, but it needs to be on a continuous basis to truly be maximized. And by the way, it's good for that one large event in the sense that if you're building that relationship with partners, they're going to cross promote the event. They're going to include content, on their channels. It's really, as I call it, moving the levers between paid, earned, and owned. All right. But that means that events, which has been historically siloed, needs to be more integrated into that content strategy planning. And I would love to talk to the audience out there. I would love to hear how many in the audience are aligned with an overall content strategy and plan for their event. So I throw that out to the audience.
we just, oh my gosh, I wish we had more time. This went really, really quickly, but I don't want to leave everybody hanging high and dry. Listen, if you want to speak to Bob Mitchell some more, his company is called Mitchell Partnership Alliances. He is also on LinkedIn. You can find him there. And he's constantly doing events and conferences and talking about this issue. So Bob's not going anywhere, and you're at the vanguard of what events are going to be in the future. So thank you so much for that. You know, I found a quote from Peter Drucker, who's one of the influential thinkers of management, that made me think of you in our conversations. And he said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic.
Oh my God. I love that, Wendy. Can I throw another quote in tandem with that? Because I'm, you know, and it's one, I just finished reading the book, Phil Knight's, biography. Phil Knight's a founder and CEO of Nike, right? And he says, for those that deem themselves experts, never see possibilities. And I say that where again, it's like, open up the aperture. Okay, don't see yourself as an expert. Look at it like this is a new kind of industry, new approach, new talent across the board. So this has been a pleasure. Wendy, thank you so much. Thank you.
I love how you do what you do.
Thank you, everyone in the audience. Please DM me. We'll talk later.
You and me, you know it. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
That wraps up the first half of our event. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Actually, it's going to be 3 minutes because we're going to be back in 3 minutes with our next MC and our next public speaker. It has been my pleasure to be your host and MC today. I wish you all well. Bye, Bob.